recording here and share my screen. So hi everyone, my name is Shayna Casper. I'm the Vermont and New Hampshire State Director with Toxics Action Center, which I will share in just a second. And welcome to the Dartmouth Biomass Project Impacts on Climate and the Community webinar. So this webinar will go for about an hour. We will end it at 8. And I'll be facilitating with panelists Rachel Smokler, Meg Sheehan, and perhaps Bill Muma, who I think is having some computer trouble earlier today.
I'm on.
Oh, hi, welcome. Thank you so much. There you are.
Good.
So just really quickly, again, so I work with Toxics Action Center. We work side by side with community groups that are fighting pollution threats in their neighborhoods. We've been around since 1987, and we work with over 1,000 community groups on a whole host of different issues, anywhere where human health and the environment intersect, including biomass. So just a quick word here on webinar or conference call line etiquette. So definitely want to encourage everyone to introduce yourself each time you speak. Engage as if it's a real meeting. So if that means, taking notes or, sitting down, want to encourage you to do that to really make sure we get the most out of this. Also to mute when you're not talking. So if you are on a webinar, you can see here that you can push a mute button in your little box on your screen. Or if you're calling in from a phone, you can just push mute. Or if you are calling in from a phone that does not have a mute button, to push *6. If you do have questions, we'll have a section for questions at the end. If it's something really urgent, feel free to jump in, but to try to keep it short. And then also just to speak up, speak loudly when you are speaking. So if you do have questions, as I said, write them down as we're going along. And if it is urgent, feel free to jump in. But if you're on a computer, you can chat me as a question as you go. Those will pop up on my screen, and I'll try to keep filtering them as we go to consolidate some of the, the similar questions for one big question at the end, or a couple of big questions. You can also raise your hand if you're on a computer. Those should be kind of at the bottom or at the top, depending on what type of computer you have of your screen. And then if you are calling in from the phone, you can also just unmute yourself and jump in. You can also email me questions at shayna@toxicsaction.org, or you can text me if you're on the phone. I'll write down this number now, 802-922-4780. And again, I've done lots of webinars, but I just got a new computer last week, so bear with me if I have any technical snafus. So on this call, we're hoping that folks will be able to hear from scientists and attorneys experienced in bioenergy and climate and public health and the forests, and have a chance to ask questions. So we'll have 10 minutes of introductions right now, and then have about a half an hour of presentations. So we'll start with Meg, then go to Rachel, and then finish up with Bill, and then have 20 minutes at the end for questions and question and answer, as well as to follow up with any next steps. But we will plan on ending this call at 8. So without further ado, I'll just have folks do a quick round of introductions. So just really quickly of your name, where you're from, and if you have any kind of big question or area of interest, to share that, but just to do it pretty quickly. So again, I'm Shayna Casper with Toxics Action Center, and I live in Montpelier, Vermont. So let's just start at the top here. Jackson, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Jackson Morgan. I live in Lyme, New Hampshire, and I'm a frequent user of the local forest and a usual breather of fresh air. And
great, thank you. Judith Kola.
Hi, I'm Judy Kalla. I live in Hanover, and I co-chair the Sustainable Hanover Energy Subcommittee.
Thank you. P.T. Bennett. And you are unmuted now, PT. Go ahead. Maybe we'll try coming back to PT. PJ? And I could not unmute you before, PJ, and I can't unmute you now. So you might have to just chat in your introduction. Chris?
Yeah, I'm Chris Hardy, H-A-R-D-E-E. I'm one of the filmmakers of the movie Burned, Our Trees, the New Coal, and I live in the southwestern corner of New Hampshire, across the river from Brattleboro.
Thank you, Chris. James? James Campion, I think you're unmuted. All right, we'll see if we can come back. Lisa Merton?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I'm another filmmaker of Burned, along with Alan Porter, and I'm West in southeastern Vermont.
Thanks. Douglas Smith, hey, thanks for joining. You want to introduce yourself? Oops. And now you should be unmuted.
Okay.
Doug, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, my name is Douglas Smith. I live in Sharon, Vermont, and I'm a member of the Upper Valley Affinity Group, a climate action affinity group in the Hanover area.
Thanks. Kathy and Ashby, I unmuted you.
Hi, Kathy Christopherson.
Sounds like Kathy's breaking up on us. We'll try later. Boris?
Okay, I am Hanover resident. I have a pellet stove, and my concern, what does it mean? There will be a few thousand pellet stove in one place.
Thanks. We've got Fergus from Chicopee.
Yes, Fergus Marshall, Chicopee, Massachusetts. I'm deeply involved in the biomass, what it's doing to our environment and what it is doing to taint our politics.
Thanks, Fergus. ZD, I think you should be unmuted now.
Sorry before. My name is Christine. I'm a Hanover resident and neighbor. I just would like to know what's going on with the air pollution from biomass.
Air pollution concerns. John Tuttle, I think you're unmuted.
Yeah, hi, John Tuttle from Ackworth, New Hampshire, with an interest in HB 183, which Governor Sununu vetoed last week, having to do with subsidies for biomass.
Thanks. I also have D20339T. I just unmuted. Who's that? Yep, I think you're there. Go ahead. You want to introduce yourself?
We're Judy and Kim from Hanover. We're following the discussion about this project.
Thank you, guys. Rosie?
Hi, I'm Rosie Kerr. I live in South Stratford, Vermont, and I'm the Director of Sustainability at Dartmouth.
Thanks. Let's do Dali.
Hi, my name's Daniela Alley. I'm a reporter with New Hampshire Public Radio. I cover the Upper Valley and I'm just following the Dartmouth biomass plant development.
Great. Matthew Nola.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, Matt Nola from Corinth, Vermont. I have an interest in forestry and how it affects climate change. I'm specifically interested in learning more about how if the Dartmouth biomass plant were to be built, how it may affect the local forest economy. And also climate, and how it might help climate change as well.
And Scott Nichols.
Hi, I'm a Lyme resident and I have a tree farm here. And I also run a business that imports and distributes wood burning boilers for heating.
All right, and I think we've got a bunch of phone calls here. So let's start with 603-653-6850. You should be unmuted. Ooh. All right, perhaps not. And then the next number we've got here ends with 68 8318. You should be unmuted.
Can you hear me? This is Laura Simon.
Hey, Laura.
Okay, so I live in Wilder, right across the river from Hanover, and I'm kind of interested in how we pull people together who want to learn more and are concerned about this.
Great. All right, and then we've got 0237. You should be unmuted.
That could be me. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Go ahead, that's you.
My name is Jim Hurt. I serve on the board of the Renewable Nations Institute, and I've been doing some research for the last few years on biomass plants and CO2 capture and reuse to capture CO2 and turn it into a fuel that can be returned to the furnace to create a negative carbon biomass plant.
Thanks, Jim.
A negative carbon plant.
And we've got a 0689 number on the line. Oop, and now you should be unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Susan Boutwell, and I work at Dartmouth College.
Sorry, guys, I'm too slow here. Okay, and then we've got a 4979 number. Who's that? All right, looks like no one. And then I think that might be it. Who have I missed here? Speak up now.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I think when you said a number somewhat incorrectly, I thought it was my number and not, I'm 643-6850.
Oops,
and you
sorry
said
about that.
653, so I wasn't sure whether to mention. My name's Carol Weingeist. I'm active with the Upper Valley Sierra Club and eager to learn more about this project.
Great. Anyone else want to introduce themselves?
I'm Joanna Scharf from Cornish, on the Cornish Energy Committee, and just very interested in whether biomass is a good option or not.
Thanks.
We're Barb and Alan Calloway from Hanover, so we're interested in the Dartmouth project.
Thanks, Barb.
Hello?
Yep, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Virginie Niedermeyer from Hanover, and I'm interested in the impact of this biomass plant on human health.
Renita?
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yes, I said I'm Virginie Niedermeyer from Hanover.
Oh. Yep, got you. Thank you. Sorry, thought it was someone else.
Oh, okay. Okay.
All right. Anyone else I missed who wants to introduce themselves? Got a big crew today. All right, let's dive in. So I'll start off by introducing Meg Sheehan, public interest environmental attorney based in New Hampshire, who has done work including with Massachusetts renewable energy standards and energy policies limited to subsidies for incineration technologies such as wood burning and biomass. She works internationally in campaigns involving rivers and climate and forests and indigenous rights. So I'll now mute myself and want to encourage everyone else to do the same and hand it over here to Meg. Meg, did you drop off there real quick?
Nope, I don't believe so.
Oh, go ahead. Alrighty, take it away.
Okay. Slides, do you have my slides up? Okay, so Dartmouth is going from burning oil for heat and electricity, cogeneration, to burning wood or biodiesel instead of oil. They'll be required to buy replacement electricity from the grid. It's really unknown how much that will be. Next. Next, whoops, I think we're not in the right order here. Well, I'll just keep talking. One concerning or unique aspect of this project is that it is going to be a private utility, which for me raises concerns about accountability. Dartmouth will be, let's see, you don't have my slides up in order here, I don't think. Sorry if I can, nope, sorry, nope.
Nope, those are the slides that I got, sorry.
All right, okay, I'll just talk from my notes then. So it's going to be a private utility. Dartmouth will engage with the developer to finance and build and operate this project. So Dartmouth will not have really anything to do with this. The developer will be responsible for the permitting, the air pollution permitting, and ensuring compliance with any forestry regulations that would cover the forestry operations. And one thing that I have learned about these biomass plants, whether they're for burning electricity or burning for heat only, is that it's really a financial deal. There are taxpayer and ratepayer subsidies. For example, usually there are renewable energy credits that the developer can sell to make this financially viable. New Hampshire does have a program for thermal only renewable energy credits. There are US Department of Agriculture regulations, support programs that help support the procurement of the wood for the burning. So this project, in my view, is probably going to end up in someone's socially responsible investing green energy portfolio as a green and renewable project. And Goldman Sachs is involved in helping Dartmouth to finance this, and the financial aspect of what's happening here with setting up this private utility, basically a power plant in our community, has not been disclosed. Biomass power stations are not new. There are hundreds of them all over the country. It's not a new technology. Dartmouth hasn't disclosed what's happening with the selection of the developer, but it's pretty easy to figure out what this is going to look like. The timeline is on Dartmouth's website, as probably most people have seen. They're expecting to become operational in 2025, and they've already identified 4 developers that they're going to choose from. They'll be issuing a request for proposals, which will provide some of the specifications for the plant design and the other aspects of the project in September, as I understand it. So what this project is all about is, and I'm sorry, but I want to pull my slides up here. Let's see. Being sustainable, renewable, clean, and green. And what this means, you know, from a lawyer's perspective, there's really no definition out there that I know of that would apply to this project. There is such a thing as renewable energy under various state renewable portfolio standards, but sustainable, clean, green, and renewable is in the eye of the beholder. And Dartmouth's definition from their sustainability plan says that it's to improve energy efficiency, to get 100% of energy from renewables by 2050, and to reduce greenhouse gases. Those are great goals, but in fact, when we look at, is this clean and green and renewable, again, it depends on how you look at it. I think it's pretty clear that this project won't reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Measuring Dartmouth's CO2 emissions at the smokestack, this project emits more CO2 than the oil they're burning now. I think everyone has probably seen the Dartmouth alumni letter that calls it a bad idea and says that it will increase carbon emissions substantially. When we think about whether it's clean and green and sustainable from a community and forest perspective, there are certainly lots of concerns about that. Biomass plants, whether they're burning wood for thermal only, as in this case, or for electricity, they still emit air pollutants, and those air pollutants include, which Rachel will talk about later, particulates, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, lead, mercury, hazardous air pollutants, etc. In my experience doing this for many years with many community groups, the air permits that are issued, especially for these smaller types of biomass plants, are very weak. We also have the community impacts from truck trips, from diesel emissions, noise, and so forth. We have ash production that requires hauling off-site and disposal. And again, we have the forestry impacts. Dartmouth's own sustainability professor has stated in the press that it will take 100 years to regrow the forest. I do want to address Dartmouth's point that they keep talking about in terms of efficiency. Well, certainly burning wood for heat is more efficient than burning it for electricity. When you look at per unit of energy produced, whether it's an electron or a watt or a thermal unit of heat, that is true. But burning biomass in a biomass burner like Dartmouth is proposing for thermal energy still emits greenhouse gases, impacts forests and air quality. The research that I have seen indicates that Dartmouth's efficiency claims are overly optimistic and don't take into account buying electricity from the grid. Perhaps people have seen the Dartmouth study that is on the website about the forest supply. I won't get into details about that, but I will say that it's always troubling to me when I see the forestry industry refer to areas on a map as a woodshed. And Dartmouth refers to the geographic area within 50 miles, excuse me, as the Dartmouth woodshed. I think many people would look at that same map and think about a diverse forest, a living, breathing, multifaceted, biodiverse, temperate forest with flora and fauna that is meaningful to many people, and it's not just a woodshed. In terms of the forestry laws and the enforcement, based on my experience here in Massachusetts and in New England generally, there are lots of laws on the book that attempt to put some constraints on the logging that goes on, but there's a big difference between those laws and what happens on the ground. And I don't know if you have my slides up, but I have recently visited a logging job in Canaan, New Hampshire. 11 acres were logged for 3,000 tons of biomass wood chips and other wood. That is something that Dartmouth would burn in about 3 weeks. What I observed was an oil spill where the wood chipper had been operating. I observed filled wetlands. I observed deep ruts in wetlands, clear cuts in wetlands. And when I contacted the state forester, they told me it was no big deal. So I'm really not the type of person who would rely on the regulatory branch of government to protect our forests from the heavy type of logging that's going to be required for this project. And we'll close by saying that, Dartmouth has presented this as a done deal to the community, that this is all about just choosing a site, one of the 3 sites. Which site do we want? Well, it's basically all the same impacts at the 3 sites. The air pollution and traffic patterns might be a little different, but basically we're all going to be allowing the developer to profit off of our forests and off of polluting our air. And, when Dartmouth has been asked about alternatives, they're not willing to provide the public with their alternatives analysis and to provide any kind of details about the costs of alternatives. And, one of the quotes on the website is basically saying that this 30-year this wood burning power plant is something that we're going to build for $200 million, and it'll be our bridge to the future when new technology becomes available. And that's just not what the reality is in the renewable industry right now. Today in the news, AP News story about, talked about a dairy farm in upstate New York where the sun doesn't always shine, but it unveiled a solar installation that will produce industrial steam for an industrial operation. And I think the public deserves an explanation about why these alternatives have not been explored. Thanks.
Thank you, Meg. Next up, I'd like to welcome Rachel Smokler, who's a co-director of Biofuel Watch and has been recognized internationally for her work on biodiversity and forests and climate, and has 20 years of experience working with grassroots groups around the world, including how I know her through our work with Protectia Prags Park in Heinsberg, Vermont, just around the corner from where I grew up, fighting a pipeline, a fracked gas pipeline there. She's also presented at international conferences, including at the UN. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Yeah, you go to the next slide, please. So I will start out by just saying that, you know, we keep hearing that this is a clean green project, as Meg said. And so the question really I wanted to address here was, what is coming out of the smokestack from these facilities, and is it really clean? And that's a two-part question. I think the issue of what's coming out of the smokestack is part of it, and what's happening in the forest is the second part of it, which Bill Mumma will address. And normally I'm doing Bill's part rather than this part, so this was a little bit of a review for me. It's been a while since I've done this, although I did a hearing in Congress at the national level a while ago on health impacts. So first off, I just want to point out, in Vermont, where I live, the McNeil generating station, which is a 50 megawatt multi-fuel facility that burns wood, is the largest single source of air pollution in the entire state. And that's largely because of the wood that it is burning. Burning woody biomass emits lots of different kinds of pollution, including particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds, carbon monoxide in particular, and also a variety of other hazardous, what are categorized as hazardous air pollution pollutants. Those are compounds that are known or suspected to do some kind of harm to human health or the environment. So next slide, please. Included among those are of the more common ones that come out of biomass facilities include styrene, acrolein, formaldehyde, hydrofluoric acid, hydrochloric acid, and heavy metals. But it all depends on exactly what the quality, what type of wood is being burned, and how it's being burned. Some facilities are carefully operated and operate at higher temperatures and have better controls installed and so on. And those are less polluting than many that are less well operated or equipped with pollution controls. Next slide, please. One of the biggest concerns in terms of human health is particulates. And particulates are just what they sound like, little particles that come out the smokestack. And they're generally classified into at least 3 different categories: PM10, which is bigger stuff; PM 2.5, which is sort of a trash can of everything that's 2.5 micrometers or smaller; and sometimes also ultrafine or nanoparticulates, which are very, very, very tiny particles. And those little tiny particles, if you can go to the next slide, are the biggest threat to health, because they can be inhaled and directly into the lungs, deep into the lungs. They can cross through cell membranes because they're so small, travel through the vascular system, cross placenta and brain-blood barriers, and they carry toxins with them. So they are very good at delivering toxins where they can do a lot of harm. They also have a high surface area to volume, so they have a greater toxicity because they can adsorb contaminants and then deliver them. And the toxicological research shows that particulate toxicity happens through a variety of mechanisms and results in a variety of different health concerns. Next slide, please. Here's just a list of some of the studies that have been done. There's a huge literature on particulate pollution and its health impacts. Heart and lung disease, systemic inflammation, which is an underlying condition of many diseases, autism, brain inflammation, Alzheimer's, various cancers, premature birth, asthma, learning problems, and compromised lung development in children. And there are more. I just pulled some that I happen to have studies in a file about. So will pollution controls and regulations protect us? We've been told, for example, by Dartmouth that I think that they're going to install electrostatic precipitators, which are one of the better forms of pollution control. And they tell us that 98% or so, I mean, I can't, it's 96, 98, somewhere around there. And this is what we're told in many facilities, is filtered. But what exactly does that mean? This figure is by weight and mass. The larger particulate matter is more easily filtered and comprises the vast bulk of the weight. So might be most of that 98%. The remaining is a very small portion of the total weight, but it's a very, very large number of particles. And also, some particles are formed outside of this, after the smoke has come out of the stack as a condensate. And some recent studies are showing that that is actually a pretty significant amount. Again, just to highlight, the operation conditions, the control technologies, and the quality of the fuel are key and vary tremendously. But all of these facilities emit very large numbers of very small particulates, the most dangerous to health. Next slide, please. And that is why organizations and associations of medical professionals, including the American Lung Association, have directly said that they oppose biomass incinerators, along with many other medical professionals and associations, which you can see and read in a document called Second Opinion, The Medical Profession Diagnoses Biomass Incineration. Next slide, please. On top of that, benefits and costs of federal regulations in the US. In 2007, a report to Congress said that the largest estimated benefits of all federal regulations attributable to reduction in public exposure to a single air pollutant, fine particulate matter. In other words, this is a huge costly to human health, and if you want to put a price on people's health, this is a huge, costly, very, very serious problem is particulate pollution. Next slide, please. In a study done by Mary Booth from the Partnership for Policy Integrity, and I suggest people go to her website for a lot of really useful information, she states, burning wood and other biological materials for energy emits as much or more pollution than burning fossil fuels, including coal. The emissions are a function of the fuel type, combustion temperature, and pollution controls. But, and here is the key, in PFPI's analysis of air pollution permits in 7 states, we have found that biomass burners are always more polluting than natural gas, and they're basically similar to coal. Admittedly better for some pollutants like sulfur and mercury, but the same or worse for particulates and nitrogen oxide, and sometimes much worse for particulates. Next slide, please. So people will tell you, well, we were already burning wood in our residential wood stoves. And yes, this is of course true. And those stoves are often very dirty and a significant contribution to air pollution. So the question is, why would we make that worse? Particulate matter emission rates of institutional biomass burners are generally lower. The rate is lower than those of domestic wood stoves, but the amount of wood burned in those facilities is so much greater. And hence the overall impact of pollution in the communities where they're located is big. Next, please. The question we would ask about the Dartmouth facility is it dirtier than what they're burning currently, which as I understand it is number 6 heating oil. And from the last few days as I was preparing for this, I did some research and tried to find an answer for that. And what I found basically led to me to the conclusion that it's essentially similar analysis as with coal. It's comparable. But that's not even the question, because really we can do so much better. Why would we replace something dirty with something that's just a little bit less dirty if we have other options? Next, please. There are other concerns about emissions as well, besides what's coming out of the stack. Many people who live next to these facilities are really troubled by the dust that occurs from the loading and unloading of wood chips or wood pellets. And I don't know exactly what Dartmouth's plans are, but there's actually been a lot of trouble with explosions from storage facilities where large amounts of chips or pellets are stored. Air pollution from the trucking in of wood. And then there's problems with the ash. Ash blows around easily. Sometimes it can be contaminated with heavy metals. And in some studies have shown in some places, even radionuclides like cesium-137. And somehow, somewhere along the line, it has to be disposed of. The question is it safe? Is it going to be applied to agricultural fields? And as we've heard from Dartmouth, and is that a safe practice? And what's going to happen as it's being loaded, unloaded, transported, et cetera. And then another thing that we've often seen is that facilities that start out burning, quote, clean wood from forest residues, et cetera, end up shifting along the way because they find it difficult to get enough of that material and because it's expensive. And they often switch to burning much dirtier material, which includes construction debris and has a lot of other kinds of toxins in the emissions. Last but not least, I've stuck to other kinds of emissions, and I haven't talked about CO2, but we all know that climate change itself is a huge threat to public health at this point. That's well acknowledged. So I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Bill Mumma. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rachel. And I should also just warn everyone, we're having a really big thunderstorm here in Montpelier where I live. So apologies if I lose power. I don't know what else to do about it. And then I'm also stalling here and encouraging folks to write down their questions in the chat box if possible, because I still have to pull up Bill's notes here. So hold on, slides, I apologize. So hold on just 1 second. And again, you can do that in the chat box. You can do that, sorry, I can't talk and do this at the same time. By texting me, by emailing me, or you can just speak up at the end.
Okay.
Sorry, they're still uploading now. If you want to get started, Bill, go right ahead.
Yeah, let me get started. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Bill Mumma. I'm a climate scientist. I've worked on climate change since 1988. That was my first professional foray into dealing with climate change. I have been a lead author or a coordinating lead author of 5 IPCC reports, all on mitigation. And one of those in particular was on the role of renewable energy, which had a big section on bioenergy, as well as solar, wind, and all the other things. I've also, it's been mentioned several times, the letter that's been posted by 3 very distinguished Dartmouth alumni, just so you know who they are. George Woodwell was one of the first scientists, he's actually an ecologist, but first scientist to make clear the relationship between climate change and natural systems like forests, and also about the potentially uncontrollable feedbacks if we allow climate change to become worse. In other words, as it gets worse, as the temperatures rise, natural systems like wetlands, permafrost regions in the north, and forests begin to exhale more carbon dioxide and methane. And that traps more heat, and we can have a runaway climate system. George was one of the first people to point that out. He also explained why DDT bioconcentrates. He's done a lot of good things. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences. He's received an honorary degree from Dartmouth College. Bill Schlesinger is also a member of the National Academy of Sciences. He's written extensively on bioenergy. Just recently with John DeSico, they talked about the why we have to get out of bioenergy if we're going to address climate change. There's a very 4-page article, plain English, that they published in the past few months. And then John Sturman is a professor at the Sloan School of Management at MIT, and he's the Forster professor who works on systems dynamics with all of his students, and they have done a lot of work on climate change and the carbon cycle. He published a paper in January a year ago that demonstrates very clearly how much worse carbon dioxide is from burning wood than any of the fossil fuels. He was looking at it for electricity production. It is more like it's more like coal when you're using it just for heat, and that analysis is one of the best that's been done. So let me just focus though on the implications for forests. Many people assume that if you protect a forest, you're protecting a static stock. This first slide here just shows the age of the different stands in different parts of the country. And you'll see that in the South, it's really, really bad. There are very few old trees. In the North, in our region, the median age is around 75 or 80 years, but we have relatively few trees that are 100 years old. Yet we have species that have life expectancies of 300 or 400 years. And we have some relics in New England that are of those ages. And they demonstrate what could happen if we would let some of our forests grow to their biological maturity. We would be sequestering vast amounts of additional carbon. This slide just simply shows all the sources of carbon loss from fire, wind, drought, insects, and land conversion, and the amount of carbon emissions that come from harvesting. That's the one on the upper left-hand side. And it turns out that 85% of the emissions that come from forests is from the harvesting of forests. All the fossil fuels that are used to cut down the trees, and all the emissions that occur, particularly from the soils when trees are cut. All the waste that occurs during the process. That's an astounding number. It's estimated by EPA that in the United States, forests are absorbing an amount equivalent to about 11 to 13% of our annual emissions from fossil fuels. In the world as a whole, forests are absorbing about 25%, so double what the world is doing, twice as good compared to the emissions of the world than we are doing as a nation. And that number has been going down. That is, even as our fossil fuel emissions have been decreasing slightly, the percentage that is being, the equivalent that's being absorbed from the atmosphere, that percentage has been going down as well. Some foresters argue, well, it's still, we're absorbing more than we're losing from cutting, but that's the wrong metric. It's not that we're talking about carbon neutrality here. Carbon neutrality is just not good enough. Theoretically, as the Sturman study shows, if you wait for 100 years or so, you might get a forest, a replacement forest. It's not a regrown forest, it's a replacement forest. And it won't replace the forest that was there because it will not be the same mix of species, it will not be the same ecological functioning that it had before. But if you did it on a carbon basis, it might actually be there. I don't know about you, but I don't think I'm going to be around to check that out. I don't think anybody who's on this call is going to be around to check that out. It is a hope, and there's no way to be sure that it will happen. And we can see right here, this is just showing the difference. What's really striking is that the harvesting of forests exceeds US fossil fuel emissions from the commercial and building sectors combined. We are concerned about the building sector and how much emissions come from heating buildings and cooling buildings. We're getting that just from cutting forests, legitimately cutting forests, sustainably managing forests. Another interesting report just came out last year by Erb and colleagues, which found that our forests are could be absorbing twice as much carbon as they are right now. In other words, instead of an amount equivalent to 25% of global emissions, it could be 50%. But it's not, because we manage forests in a way in which they never get big enough to store much carbon. And even if we do it sustainably, we always keep the size of the forest smaller than it would be otherwise. Secondly, that's another study that came out last year by a group at the Woods Hole Research Center, where, in full disclosure, I happen to chair the board. It's a scientific research institute. They found that if we allowed all secondary forests to continue growing, and if we did not convert any more land, we would virtually close the gap between what we are emitting and what all natural systems, including the oceans, the forests, wetlands, and other things, are absorbing. That's without even reducing emissions. If we do that and reduce our emissions from fossil fuels, coal and oil and gas, and from bioenergy, we would be lowering carbon dioxide in the atmosphere rather than raising it. All right, this just shows forest cover in the Northeast, and you can see there are forests all over the place. The big blob over up in New York State is the Adirondack Reserve. You can see Maine has lots of forests. You can see Vermont and New Hampshire have lots of forests. Western Massachusetts actually has lots of forests. But it doesn't tell the whole story. The next slide shows the full story about the carbon density. This is a map put together by the US Forest Service. It's called the Carbon Online Estimator. It was still accessible as of mid-April, but like a lot of other things that are useful, it's been removed from the federal government websites. But anyway, this shows quite a difference. Notice upper New Hampshire and northeastern Vermont and almost all of Maine is bright pink. And if you look at the label on the side, that says the number 40, and that's in metric tons per hectare, or if you prefer to think in terms of tons per acre, reduce that number by about 2.5. But 40, what is it around Hanover? Look where Hanover is. It's right there on the border between Vermont and New Hampshire, and it's about halfway up the boundary there. And if you draw a 50-mile circle, what you discover is swings down all the way almost to the Massachusetts border, well over into Vermont, almost all the way across Vermont. And that is the most carbon dense forested area in the entire Northeast United States, all the way down to West Virginia, and far west is Ohio. It is 3 times the carbon density, 3 times more carbon on every acre in your neighborhood than it is in Maine. Why is that? Well, because Maine, first of all, has managed their forest to produce wood pulp and now bioenergy. And basically the trees are never allowed to get big enough to store much carbon. We're fortunate that partly by accident, our forests in the southern and central part of New England, the southern part of New Hampshire and Vermont and western Massachusetts, have been allowed to grow back for most of the last 150 years. And there are, in fact, trees that are 150 years old, some that are 200 years old. And I said some individual trees that are as old as 300, almost 400 years in age. That is a legacy that we've inherited. Now, I've just published a paper with 2 colleagues, one of whom's a forest ecologist. What we put all this information together and said, we hear about afforestation and reforestation, that is planting new trees. That's a great thing to do, but it will not make an impact until 50 to 75 years from now, because the trees won't be big enough to store much carbon. If we allow these trees, despite their already great carbon density, they are of just an age, remember the median age is 80 years, to really put on a growth spurt. And this is documented by studies at Harvard Forest and a lot of other places. We're calling this management strategy proforestation. And it doesn't mean we have to let every single forest grow like this, but it means that we don't just keep managing everything so the trees are young. This is just showing what happens in the Southeast when bioenergy takes over and the supplier says that they specialize in harvesting equipment and techniques that minimize environmental impact. Well, what happens is there's not enough residues, so they start cutting everything and everything's a residue. Next. This is just showing from the ground. Next, this is just showing the truck. There are the residues, which basically we're only cutting, turning the big trees into wood that goes into houses, and we just take the sawdust and make pellets. That is a total fabrication. Every bioenergy company claims they're only using residues or they're only using sawdust. I don't know of any for which that is the dominant option. And this is just showing what a pellet manufacturing plant looks like in order to make the materials that'll be used. I don't know whether Dartmouth's going to use wood chips or wood pellets, but it's not a pretty process. And this is what some of our forests here, actually these are from Massachusetts, so that's south of you folks, but these are some of the magnificent trees. The tallest tree in all of New England is the tallest, 3 out of the tallest 4 are in Massachusetts. The 4th one is in New Hampshire. These happen to be white pines. There are other very large species as well. And finally, in the last slide.
That's all I got, sorry.
Oh, that's it. Okay, all right. And so basically that's the story. We need to do proforestation on some of our land if we're going to actually address climate change. We cannot burn our way through forests to get there.
Thank you so much, Bill. Here we go. Let me share once again. So now we've got the chance for some questions and answers. Probably why you guys are all actually on the call. So just as a quick reminder, we've got a lot of people on the call, so I will ask to have you write your questions right now. So folks can just write a question by chatting on the computer, or if that's not possible, to send me a quick email or a text. That way we can kind of consolidate them as we go along. As we're waiting for those questions to come in, Meg or Bill or Rachel, do you guys have any questions for each other? Something that you hoped that someone else would cover that wasn't covered?
Yeah. I mean, I could make one comment, which is I really appreciated Bill's presentation and especially the historical view of forests, which is so important. But one of the things that I think is really important to understand is that the emissions of CO2 coming out of the smokestack from a facility that burns CO2 is at least 50 to 150% more than what is coming out when you're burning coal per unit of energy that you generate. So that's for an electricity generating facility. And that's just the figure that I have in my head for electricity generating facilities. But the point is that because wood generally burns pretty inefficiently, and it depends a lot on how it's being handled, et cetera, and how wet it is, there is a lot of CO2 emissions coming out of the stack compared even to fossil fuels.
That's right.
And that doesn't account even for what's happening out in the forests.
There's definitely more than is coming out from the burning of the number 6 heating oil. And that doesn't even take into account, I don't believe, and maybe someone can answer this, if they then start buying their electricity from the grid, what is the carbon content of the electricity that they're buying? That gets added in. All the transport for the fuels of the wood and of the ash, all that diesel emission. And by the way, diesel trucks emit large amounts of small particulates, which are very damaging to health.
So the first question we've got here is, would burning agricultural products be any better? Perhaps hemp? I have no idea.
Well, the argument there is because agricultural products are on an annual cycle. You don't have to wait 50 or 100 years for them to grow back. That is true. The problem is that most agricultural products are also fertilized with nitrogen fertilizer. And nitrogen fertilizer, there's bacterial action in the soil that converts some of the nitrogen that's not taken up by the plants into nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas that's about 300 times worse per pound than carbon dioxide. And there's studies that show that many of those, therefore, have higher total global warming potential than many of the fossil fuels. It could be possible that there are short, rapid growing things that could be used, but it's not a big improvement, and it doesn't address the particulate problem very well.
And then Judy has a question. If you were president of Dartmouth, how would you meet its energy needs? Who wants to start taking that one on?
Well, I can take it on in the following way.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill.
I wonder, I mean, this idea that we're going to build a transition 30 years, spend all that money to do that, and then spend the money again to get whatever's new and exciting 30 years from now. Why spend the money twice? At the hearing at Dartmouth, the meeting at Dartmouth the other night, someone pointed out that Ball State University in Indiana has gone completely to ground source heat pumps for heating. And they did it on a budget that would be comparable to what Dartmouth is planning to spend. Boston, Massachusetts is considering ground source heat for their downtown and putting the wells underneath the streets. Troy, New York is looking into ground source heat. So this is not exactly, you know, some future. We don't have to wait for the future for this to happen. I mean, I've been living with ground source heat for 13 years now, and it works very, very well. And I started out when it wasn't working very well. It took me 1.5 years to get it working right, but the technology is now so much better and so much cheaper that I think a re-examination of the cost would be useful. And finally, someone mentioned that there are subsidies for bioenergy. As you know, the governor of New Hampshire has vetoed that in the past, and vetoed not once, but I think twice. And subsidies are not going to be there forever. So the cost calculation will probably be overturned, because bioenergy is one of the most expensive ways to get heat and electricity of any source. When you do those count, and if you do the externalities, it's even more expensive.
Thanks. And I've gotten a couple of questions by email ahead of time that I think everyone's answered. Someone who's going to jump in, go ahead.
I did want to say I'm not able to get into the chat site.
No problem. Jump right in.
Okay. Industrial hemp is a very attractive energy crop, which could completely replace our demand for hardwood logs, hardwood pellets, that sort of thing. Of course, we should leave old growth forests alone and let them grow. But then we should ask, what else can we burn? And industrial hemp can produce energy in 3 different ways. One is from the stem of the plant, which produces a excellent material for pellets. One is from the leaves, which can be fermented into methanol. And the most obvious are from the seeds, to produce a superior oil. In the Midwest, there are a number of gas stations for heavy trucks. They provide hemp biodiesel. They're very popular.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name at the beginning, but I think we already just discussed hemp real quick. And I just got another question about Europe's biomass plants. So Bill, do you want to take that one on? Europe has been using biomass plants, combined heat and power plants. Yes. Are those equally bad? Can you just speak a little bit about Europe's biomass versus what's been happening in the US?
It turns out that you know, Europe gets all this credit for doing all this great stuff on renewables, but 2/3 of their renewable energy is bioenergy. And a big portion of that is actually coming from the United States and Canada, and increasingly from developing countries. So this is leading to deforestation in developing countries as well as in the United States. Finally, they did agree to set some restrictions on the ecological damage that's caused by bioenergy, that's from the deforestation and so on that occurs. There is no bioenergy plant that I know of that operates entirely on residues. And one of the problems of burning residues is if you don't leave residues in a forest after you've cut trees, there is no way for the carbon to begin building up or the nutrients that are in the leaves and needles to go back into the soil. So there's a decrease in the productivity of the next crop. So it's, you know, there's no free lunch here. And the question is, if we could get all of our services, transportation, heating, air conditioning, electricity, without burning anything, that would be the ideal situation. And we will be burning stuff for a while, but we don't have to burn it forever. And the sooner we stop, the better chance we have of avoiding really catastrophic climate change in the future.
What about industrial hemp as a fuel?
It's still putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and it still has emissions from the agricultural processing. And so it may be useful in the short term, but it's not a long-term solution, I don't think.
So
what about capturing CO2 to make a fuel?
I'm going to jump in. This is my role as a facilitator. It is 8 o'clock, and I promised we would be off the phone by 8 o'clock. So I'm going to wrap it up, but we have our contact information up here on the screen. If folks do have more follow-up questions, I think there was about one other question that I got that we haven't addressed yet. So I'll send that out to the group, and I'll also polish up these notes. I apologize if they've been so rough. And we'll post these all up on our website, toxicsaction.org/resources. Probably by the end of the week, because we'll try to pull up, make sure all of the actual slides get pulled together. Apologies for that, Meg. And if folks do have additional questions, you can shoot them there. And then just another quick next step is that we will also be posting there a petition if folks are interested in signing. That will be up there. Anyone else want to share any other next steps coming out of this call? I recognize we're just a few minutes over here.
Hello?
Yep.
Hello? This is Virginie Niedermeyer. Hello. Yeah. So in terms of next step, one of the things that has struck me about this whole project is that the lack of transparency on the part of the college in terms of what their plans are, and which to me says that something is up. And the question is, how would the students feel about this if they knew about it? And how do we make them aware of the impact of this project on their future and, you know, on the community, which includes them?
Anyone want to take that, and then we'll close it off?
I have another next step also. I could wait.
Okay, go ahead, Laura. Yeah, I'm not sure if that was an answerable question, so I'll just kind of leave that out there. If folks feel compelled to connect afterwards, I'm sure we can connect you guys after this call. Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, I just want to remind people that I think it's a Tuesday, the 13th, at Dartmouth at Baleen Hall, 6 o'clock. It's the second of the forums. The last forum yielded at least 30 speakers. Most of them, I would say almost 95%, were having concerns, if not against, this program. And I'd also like to figure out, maybe through Shana, and how we all can connect if that's what we'd like to do. Maybe set up a meeting at the Hanover Library. Or I leave that to some of the folks there who are in groups, but I just encourage it.
All right, well, thank you so much for sharing that again, Laura, as well. Join me, everyone, in just thanking Meg, Rachel, and Bill for their knowledge. And we'll, again, be posting this at toxicsaction.org/resources, and hopefully see folks on the 13th.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.